the Washington family arrived in town with style and grace that turned heads in the quiet neighborhood of Silver Pines. Their car, a sleek black SUV, glided down the manicured street as Mrs. Camille Washington took in the surroundings with excitement. Already imagining their children playing in the spacious yard and the warm evenings spent grilling on the patio. Her husband, Marcus Washington, a striking man with an aura of confidence, had recently been appointed as the city's new mayor. They had worked hard to get here, and now they were ready to make Silver Pines their home. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Across the street, behind her curtain-covered windows, Miss Gertrude Wallace's keen eyes tracked every movement. Gertrude had lived in this neighborhood for over 50 years and believed she knew what was best for it. With every box that movers carried into the Washingtons' new house, her frown deepened. She muttered to herself, recounting all the good families who'd come and gone. And she was certain that the Washingtons were not her idea of a good family. As she continued watching, she noticed how warmly Camille greeted the movers and how Marcus supervised everything with an easy authority. It was clear they weren't just anyone, but in Gertrude's mind, they were outsiders. A few days later, as the family settled in, Camille decided to introduce herself to the neighbors. She moved from house to house with warm cookies and a bright smile, extending a hand and a kind word. Most neighbors responded politely, some even warmly. But when she knocked on Gertrude's door, she was met with cold, sharp eyes and a scrutinizing gaze that made her pause. "Well, what do you want?" Gertrude demanded without a hint of courtesy, her tone icy and unwelcoming. Camille kept her smile. "Hello. I'm Camille Washington, your new neighbor. I wanted to introduce myself and my family. My husband just started as the new mayor, and we're excited to be part of the community." Gertrude crossed her arms, looking down her nose at Camille as though she were something unfortunate on her doorstep. "I'm aware. I've seen you moving in." "Well, thank you. But I don't need any cookies," she said. Her words clipped. She shut the door before Camille could respond. Camille stood there for a moment, stunned but determined not to let it bother her. She returned to her family with a heavy heart, sensing that their welcome here would not be easy. Marcus noticed her pensive expression and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Don't worry, Cam. Some people just need time," he said, though his eyes flickered with a hint of concern. But it didn't take long to see that Gertrude's disdain ran deeper than a simple cold shoulder. Every morning, Camille noticed the curtains twitching from across the street as she sent the kids off to school. Every evening, Gertrude would take her daily stroll just to pause at the edge of the Washingtons' property, looking over their garden with a tight-lipped expression of disgust. Rumors began to ripple through the neighborhood. Whispered words about the new family and assumptions made in hushed tones that made Camille's heart sink. One evening, Camille overheard one of her other neighbors at the grocery store. "Did you hear about the new folks on Maple Street? I heard the husband is trying to change all sorts of things in the city," the woman whispered to her friend. "They're saying he's got big plans, probably won't be good for anyone here." Camille clenched her hands around her shopping cart, feeling the sting of the prejudice she thought was long gone. She knew her family was being unfairly judged, not by who they were but by the color of their skin and the power they represented. And the source of it all was Gertrude, fueling the flames with every bitter glance and whispered remark. Back home, as she prepared dinner, Camille sighed, sharing her frustration with Marcus. He nodded, his face set in a determined expression. "We've dealt with people like this before, Camille," he reminded her gently. "And we've always risen above. We're here to make a difference. And nothing Gertrude Wallace or anyone else thinks will change that." But Gertrude wasn't done yet. She had plans of her own, a simmering resentment that would soon erupt. turning this once quiet neighborhood into a battleground of wills, respect, and justice. And little did she know, the Washingtons were more prepared for that battle than she could ever imagine. The days slipped by, but tension only seemed to grow thicker in the air around Silver Pines. Marcus and Camille, while busy settling in and adjusting to Marcus's new role as mayor, couldn't ignore the unwelcome feeling that hung over their new home. Camille continued trying to foster a sense of community, greeting neighbors with her warm smile and joining local groups. But everywhere she turned, she felt the cold shadow of Gertrude's watchful eyes. One morning, Camille was out watering her front garden when she caught sight of Gertrude's unmistakable figure, stiff and unyielding, watching from across the street. Camille took a deep breath and waved, determined to show kindness. But Gertrude only narrowed her eyes and looked away, as if disgusted by the mere gesture. Frustration bubbled beneath Camille's calm exterior, but she kept her composure, refusing to give Gertrude the satisfaction of seeing her ruffled. The Washington children, Maya and Jordan, began to feel the strain as well. Maya, an outgoing 12-year-old with a love for sports, had trouble fitting in at her new school. Despite her efforts to make friends, she found herself often on the outskirts, whispered about by classmates who'd heard rumors from their parents. Jordan, a bright, sensitive 8-year-old, asked Camille one day, "Mom, why don't the other kids talk to me? Did I do something wrong?" Camille's heart broke as she reassured him, struggling to find the right words to explain the prejudice that even a child could sense. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. Camille was hosting a small get-together in their backyard, a casual, friendly barbecue with a few families from Marcus's office. Laughter filled the air as the kids played tag, and adults chatted by the grill, sharing stories and enjoying the delicious aroma of grilled ribs and burgers. Marcus was at ease, laughing with his colleagues, while Camille moved among the guests, making sure everyone felt welcomed and cared for. From her window, Gertrude watched with growing fury. To her, this gathering was nothing short of an intrusion on the orderly neighborhood she'd known all her life. She felt a surge of anger at the laughter, the joy, the unmistakable sense of belonging that seemed to fill the Washingtons' yard. It grated on her nerves, a reminder of how her world was changing, and she didn't like it one bit. In a fit of rage, Gertrude grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the police. She exaggerated every detail, painting a picture of chaos and unruliness, claiming that the Washingtons were disturbing the peace and behaving irresponsibly. "I don't know what's going on over there," she told the dispatcher, her voice filled with forced concern. "But it's getting out of hand. There are children running everywhere. And I think they might be drinking or doing something illegal." She knew these were unfounded accusations, but she didn't care. She was determined to disrupt their happiness. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the Washingtons' home. Lights flashing, the officers approached the backyard, where the guests fell silent, confused and concerned. Camille's heart skipped a beat as she saw the uniforms approaching, a heavy sense of dread settling over her. Marcus stepped forward, his posture calm but resolute, and addressed the officers. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. The lead officer cleared his throat, slightly taken aback by Marcus's calm authority. "We received a complaint about noise and possible disorderly conduct," he explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. Camille glanced toward Gertrude's house, where she could just make out the curtain moving as Gertrude peered through, watching with satisfaction. Camille felt a mixture of anger and sadness. She knew exactly who was behind this, and it stung to know that someone could harbor such hostility. "Officers," Marcus began, his voice calm but with a steel edge. "I'm Marcus Washington, the new mayor of this city. This is a private gathering with a few close friends and family. I can assure you that we're well within the noise limits. And there's no illegal activity here. Would you like to see our permit for the barbecue grill?" The officers exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard. "No, sir. That won't be necessary," the lead officer replied, a slight blush creeping up his neck as he realized the situation. "We apologize for the inconvenience. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." One by one, Marcus's guests began murmuring in support, echoing that the gathering was peaceful and friendly. The officers nodded, apologizing again before heading back to their patrol cars, their shoulders slumping with a mixture of embarrassment and relief to be leaving. As the patrol cars pulled away, Camille looked across the street at Gertrude's house, her jaw set in a firm line. She could see Gertrude glaring back, her face twisted in a scowl that hinted at more resentment to come. But now, Camille and Marcus understood the depths of Gertrude's animosity, and they were no longer willing to let it slide. They would not allow their family to be targeted simply for existing, for celebrating, or for being different in the eyes of a bitter, narrow-minded neighbor. Marcus took Camille's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze as he said softly, "This isn't over. But we'll handle it together. We'll show her that we belong here as much as anyone else, if not more." Their party continued, a bit subdued but still filled with warmth and resilience. The Washingtons knew this was just the beginning of a battle for acceptance. But they were ready. They weren't just newcomers, they were here to make a stand. For their family and for anyone else who'd ever been made to feel unwelcome. And deep down, Gertrude knew it, too. For the first time, she sensed that her reign over the neighborhood was truly being challenged, and she wasn't prepared for the strength the Washingtons would show in the days to come. The sun began to set over Silver Pines, casting a warm, golden glow across the Washingtons' backyard as the barbecue continued, laughter and conversation spilling into the evening air. But despite the warmth of their guests and the comforting presence of friends, Camille's mind remained heavy. She glanced toward Gertrude's house every so often, her gaze lingering on the shadowed figure still watching from behind the curtains. As the evening wore on, a sense of frustration grew within her. How could a simple, joyful gathering be met with such hostility? She had come to Silver Pines with an open heart, ready to embrace the community and start a new chapter of their lives. But here they were, facing judgment. Not for any action of their own, but for who they were, a successful black family moving into a neighborhood that had, for far too long, only been open to people who looked like Gertrude. Marcus, sensing Camille's unease, wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Don't let her get to you, Cam," he murmured softly. "People like her, they thrive on intimidation and fear. We're stronger than that." Camille nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. She knew he was right. But part of her couldn't shake the anger and sadness. She had always believed in building bridges, in finding common ground. But Gertrude's actions had shown her a side of human nature she wasn't sure could be reasoned with. As they lingered by the grill, a close friend of Marcus's, Tony, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh, approached them with a serious expression. "Hey, Marcus. Camille. I just wanted to say, I know this isn't easy. It's not right what that woman did today," he said, glancing pointedly across the street. "But you handled it like pros. A lot of people would have lost their cool. You both kept your heads high." Camille gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, Tony. It's hard sometimes. You know? You want to believe people are better than this, that, with a little kindness. They'll come around. But Gertrude, it's like she's set on hating us. No matter what we do. Marcus nodded in agreement. She doesn't even know us. Yet she's made up her mind. But we're not going anywhere. And we're not going to hide who we are to make her feel comfortable. As the night wore on, the guests slowly began to leave, sharing heartfelt goodbyes and promising to get together again soon. Once the last friend had driven off, Camille and Marcus cleaned up the backyard in comfortable silence, picking up plates and folding chairs as the stars began to peek out overhead. The Washington children, exhausted from playing, had already been tucked into bed, leaving just Marcus and Camille to finish the last of the cleanup. After tidying up, they finally sat together on their back porch, letting the quiet of the night wash over them. Camille leaned into Marcus, feeling a mix of contentment and lingering frustration. I thought moving here would be different. A fresh start for the kids. For us. But now, it feels like we're fighting just to exist here. Marcus took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. We are different. Cam. We're the first black family in this neighborhood. Some people are going to struggle with that. But that doesn't mean we don't belong here. He looked out over their lawn, the shadows of their garden casting familiar shapes in the moonlight. This is our home now. And we're going to make sure everyone knows that. Camille gave a small nod, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. They had faced challenges before, and they had always come out stronger. This would be no different. You're right, she whispered. We've worked too hard to let someone like Gertrude push us out. The days following the barbecue were a mixture of subtle slights and resilience. Every time Camille stepped out onto her lawn, Gertrude seemed to be there, hovering nearby as if waiting for an excuse to reprimand her for some non-existent infraction. Camille went about her business, tending to her flowers and walking the kids to the bus stop. But she could feel Gertrude's eyes on her, burning with unspoken accusations. Then, one afternoon, as Camille was pruning the rose bushes by the front porch, Gertrude made her move. She shuffled over, her face set in a tight-lipped frown, her gaze as icy as ever. Hello, Ms. Wallace. Camille greeted her politely, though her tone was reserved. She was determined to remain civil, even if Gertrude's intentions were anything but. Gertrude didn't return the greeting. Instead, she looked down her nose at Camille, her voice laced with condescension. I hope you're planning to keep that garden of yours in check. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't want any overgrown messes. Now do we? Camille felt a flicker of anger but forced herself to remain calm. I assure you, Ms. Wallace, we take pride in our home and our garden. Everything will be well maintained. Gertrude sniffed, clearly unsatisfied with the response. I certainly hope so. I'd hate to see this street go downhill. She paused, her eyes narrowing. You people may have money, but that doesn't mean you understand how things are done around here. Camille's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. Ms. Wallace, I'm not sure what you mean by you people, but I can assure you that my family and I are here to contribute positively to this community. My husband is the mayor, and we take our responsibilities seriously. For a brief moment, something like fear flickered in Gertrude's eyes, but she quickly masked it with a haughty sniff. We'll see about that, she muttered before turning and walking back to her house, leaving Camille standing there, a mixture of anger and hurt simmering beneath her composed exterior. That evening, she recounted the encounter to Marcus, who listened silently, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he looked at her, a fierce determination in his eyes. This has gone on long enough. Cam. We've tried to be polite, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But if she keeps pushing, we'll have to take action. Camille nodded, feeling a sense of relief. I just want to live in peace. Marcus. For us. For the kids. I don't want them to feel like they're growing up under someone's scrutiny. Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. We'll make it right. Cam. We'll protect our family. As the days turned into weeks, Gertrude's animosity continued to simmer. A constant, oppressive presence. She found new reasons to complain, sometimes about the kids playing in the yard. Other times about the smell of Camille's cooking wafting through the air. Every minor detail became a point of contention. A way for Gertrude to assert her control. To remind them that they were, in her mind, intruders in her pristine world. But despite her efforts, the Washingtons remained undeterred. Marcus poured himself into his work as mayor, gaining respect and admiration from many of the town's residents. His dedication to the community began to win over even the skeptics, as people saw firsthand the positive changes he was making. Camille continued her efforts as well, joining community events, volunteering at the local school, and building connections with those who were open-minded enough to see past Gertrude's influence. Slowly, the Washingtons began to build a small but loyal circle of friends in the neighborhood. People who saw them for who they were, rather than the stereotypes Gertrude tried to cast upon them. With each passing day, Camille felt the weight of Gertrude's scrutiny lessen, replaced by the warmth of genuine friendships and the realization that there were people in Silver Pines who supported them. However, Gertrude was far from finished. Each new friend the Washingtons made, each small victory they achieved, seemed to deepen her resentment. She became more withdrawn, her bitterness festering into something darker. Something that would soon erupt into a final confrontation that would test the Washingtons' resolve and change the neighborhood forever. The calm before the storm lingered over Silver Pines, a fragile piece hanging by a thread. Camille and Marcus prepared themselves, sensing that the battle was far from over. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that, no matter what Gertrude threw their way, they would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. In the quiet of their home, surrounded by the love of their family, they found the strength to stand firm, to defy the prejudice that sought to push them out. Because this was their home now, and they were here to stay.
The heat of summer settled over Silver Pines as the Washingtons prepared for their first big gathering since moving into the neighborhood. A backyard barbecue to celebrate Marcus's new role as mayor and to bring together a few close friends, colleagues, and some neighbors who had shown kindness and acceptance. Camille had spent the entire week preparing, filling their backyard with decorations, setting up tables and chairs, and organizing games for the children. She wanted everything to be perfect. A warm welcome for everyone who came through their doors. But, despite the excitement, a feeling of unease lingered. They knew that Gertrude, their bitter neighbor, wouldn't be pleased. Marcus and Camille could practically feel her disapproving glare from across the street. A cold shadow that had loomed over them since the day they'd arrived. On the afternoon of the barbecue, Camille arranged the tables with fresh flowers and set up a buffet of delicious food, sizzling ribs, fresh salads, and warm rolls. Friends arrived, bringing laughter, gifts, and smiles. The scent of the grill filled the air as Marcus expertly worked over it, flipping burgers and ribs while chatting with his colleagues and neighbors who had come to show their support. Camille, watching Marcus laughing and enjoying himself, felt a deep sense of pride. Despite the hostility they'd faced, they were here, surrounded by people who valued them. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace, as if they could finally settle into their new life. The kids were playing tag on the lawn, their laughter echoing through the yard, while adults relaxed with drinks and swapped stories. It was a picture-perfect gathering. But amid the warmth and laughter, a sense of tension began to grow. Every so often, Camille would glance across the street, where Gertrude's curtains remained firmly shut. She hadn't seen her all day, And while part of her felt relieved, another part worried about what she might be planning as the evening deepened. The atmosphere at the Washingtons' backyard barbecue gradually returned to a more lively tone. Friends who had come to support Camille and Marcus remained behind a little longer than planned, rallying around them with words of encouragement and appreciation for Marcus's resilience and leadership as mayor. A few neighbors who had kept their distance before now approached with admiration, impressed by how Marcus had handled the police incident with dignity and confidence. But the evening's unsettling interruption left a shadow over the event, and Camille couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. It was as if Gertrude had opened a door to a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. With each laugh, each friendly gesture from their guests, Camille felt her resolve harden. They were not only there to celebrate, they were making a stand. And she was determined to protect her family, her home, and her peace, no matter what Gertrude or anyone else in the neighborhood thought. As the last of the guests left, a close friend, Marissa, pulled Camille aside, her tone filled with concern. "Camille, you know we're all here for you. Gertrude is something else, but don't let her break your spirit. You've done nothing wrong." Camille smiled, though there was a fierceness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "Thank you, Marissa. I won't let her win. This is our home now. And no one, is going to take that from us." After Marissa left, Marcus began putting out the lanterns that lit their yard. Camille helped, feeling the weight of the evening settle in as the backyard quieted. She gazed at their house, at the comfortable spaces they had created for their children, and thought about how much she wanted them to grow up in a place where they could feel safe, loved, and accepted. Then, from across the street, she saw it, a flash of movement behind Gertrude's window. Camille's eyes narrowed. There she was, still watching, her gaze sharp, unyielding, like a dark presence haunting the street. Camille felt her anger flare, and for the first time, she found herself stepping forward, ready to confront the woman who had cast such a long shadow over their lives. But Marcus gently took her arm, pulling her back. "Not yet, Cam," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll do this the right way. Let her see us living our lives, showing her that we're not afraid." Camille exhaled slowly, nodding. She knew he was right, but the fire inside her was undeniable. This wasn't just about Gertrude's insults or her petty complaints. It was about the safety and respect of her family, her children's right to grow up without prejudice and fear. The next morning, Marcus and Camille sat down together at the kitchen table, determined to take action. Marcus outlined his plan. They would file a formal complaint with the city council and report Gertrude's repeated harassment to the neighborhood association. He wanted to expose her tactics and ensure that she faced consequences for her actions. They spent hours gathering evidence, recalling every encounter, every cold glare, and, most importantly, the false police report she'd made during their barbecue. With each piece of documentation, Camille felt her confidence grow. They were no longer on the defensive, they were fighting back. Later that week, Marcus took his complaint to City Hall, submitting it to the council members and alerting them to the ongoing harassment his family had faced since moving into Silver Pines. As the mayor, he knew his position came with scrutiny, but he was unwavering in his commitment to use his platform for good. He spoke with a clear voice, detailing Gertrude's actions and emphasizing that his family, and any family, deserved respect and a fair chance to live in peace. Word of Marcus's complaint spread quickly through the neighborhood. While many residents were shocked, a few quietly cheered him on. Rumors swirled, and more neighbors began to see Gertrude's behavior for what it was: baseless prejudice. Camille began receiving texts and calls from people she barely knew, offering support and expressing their disgust with Gertrude's actions. Then came the unexpected. A petition started circulating in support of the Washingtons, calling for stronger neighborhood guidelines to prevent harassment and prejudice. Camille was taken aback by the groundswell of support. People she'd barely spoken to were coming forward, recognizing the injustice her family had faced. It was the first real sign that they weren't alone, and that perhaps Silver Pines was beginning to change. But Gertrude wasn't about to let go of her control without a fight. The more support the Washingtons gained, the more furious she became. One evening, as Camille was preparing dinner, there was a sharp, insistent knock on the front door. She opened it to find Gertrude standing there, her face red with anger, her eyes flashing with rage. Do you think you can just waltz in here and change everything? Gertrude spat, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. This neighborhood has standards, values that people like you will never understand. I've been here for 50 years, and I'm not about to let you and your kind ruin it. Camille took a step back, shocked by the venom in Gertrude's voice. She felt her heart pounding, but she held her ground, her voice steady. Ms. Wallace, this is our home now. We have every right to be here. Just like anyone else. You can't intimidate us. Not anymore. Gertrude's face twisted into a sneer. Is that so? We'll see about that. She turned and stormed off, muttering under her breath as she disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Marcus received a call from a reporter at the local newspaper, who had caught wind of the situation. They wanted to run a story on the Washingtons' experience, to highlight the challenges they were facing as the town's first black family in Silver Pines. Marcus hesitated at first, knowing the scrutiny it would bring, but after discussing it with Camille, they decided to go ahead. If sharing their story could help other families in similar situations, it was worth it. The article was published within a week, and the response was immediate. Letters of support poured in, and neighbors who had once kept their distance now approached the Washingtons with words of encouragement. The public backlash against Gertrude was swift and strong. Many people were horrified to learn about her actions and openly condemned her prejudice. Her once respected reputation in the neighborhood was tarnished, and she quickly became a pariah, shunned by those who had once admired her. Then, just as Camille was setting out a fresh tray of lemonade, the peace was shattered. The loud blare of police sirens echoed down the street, and 2 patrol cars pulled up outside the Washingtons' home, their lights flashing. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and everyone turned to watch as the officers stepped out of their cars. Their faces set in a mixture of uncertainty and discomfort. Camille's heart sank. She didn't need to guess who was behind this. She looked toward Gertrude's house, where the curtains had parted just enough for Camille to see the glint of Gertrude's watchful eyes. Filled with satisfaction, Marcus, sensing the tension, handed his spatula to a friend and stepped forward, his calm, authoritative demeanor belying the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He approached the officers, keeping his voice steady but firm. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" The lead officer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "We received a complaint about noise and possible disorderly conduct." He looked around, clearly realizing the calm, family-friendly atmosphere didn't match the call's description. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Disorderly conduct? Officers, this is a family barbecue with friends and neighbors. There's no noise beyond what you'd expect from a gathering like this. And certainly nothing illegal happening here." Camille joined Marcus, her voice calm but sharp. "We're new to this neighborhood, and we know who filed that complaint. She's been harassing us since the day we moved in." The second officer, clearly uneasy, looked around, taking in the laughing children, the laid-back gathering, and the calm demeanor of everyone present. "I'm sorry for the disturbance," he said, glancing at his partner. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus nodded, though his jaw was clenched with frustration. "Thank you, officers. We'd appreciate it if you could speak to Ms. Wallace about filing false complaints in the future. We have every right to gather here, just like any other family." The officers nodded, exchanging embarrassed glances before retreating to their cars, their faces a mix of apology and discomfort. As they drove away, Camille turned back to her guests, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and sadness. She could see the sympathy in her friends' eyes, and though they offered words of support, Camille knew the damage had been done. Gertrude had once again found a way to make them feel like outsiders, as if they didn't belong. Marcus returned to the grill, resuming his role as host with a smile, but Camille could see the strain in his eyes. She knew that he, too, was feeling the weight of Gertrude's constant scrutiny and harassment, but they wouldn't let her win. Not now, not ever. The party resumed, but the carefree atmosphere had shifted. The guests a bit quieter, the laughter a bit more subdued. Camille moved among her friends, offering smiles and reassurance, determined to salvage the day. But inside, a storm was brewing. She could feel the pressure building, the frustration of weeks spent under Gertrude's judgment finally reaching its breaking point. As the sun began to set and the last guests said their goodbyes, Marcus and Camille stood side by side in their now empty backyard. The remnants of the party scattered around them. The laughter had faded, but the tension lingered, a reminder of the invisible wall that Gertrude had built between them and the neighborhood. Camille sighed, turning to Marcus. I'm tired of this, Marcus. I'm tired of feeling like we're walking on eggshells in our own home. Marcus put a comforting arm around her, his voice calm but resolute. We're not going to keep quiet anymore. Cam, she crossed a line today. And I won't let her get away with it. Camille looked up at him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. What are you going to do? Marcus's expression was set, his determination unwavering. Tomorrow, I'm filing a formal complaint with the city about harassment and misuse of police resources. Gertrude thinks she can bully us into leaving. But she's mistaken. We're here to stay, and we're going to fight back. Not just for us, but for anyone who's ever felt unwelcome in their own neighborhood. A sense of relief washed over Camille. For the first time, she felt that they had a plan. A way to stand up against the prejudice that had cast a shadow over their lives. She nodded, feeling a spark of strength reignite within her. I'm with you, Marcus, whatever it takes. As night fell over Silver Pines, Marcus and Camille knew that a battle was brewing, a battle for respect. For equality. For the right to live freely without fear or judgment. And though the road ahead would be difficult, they were ready to face it, side by side, with the strength of a family united. Inside her darkened home, Gertrude watched them from her window, a cold smile on her lips. She thought she had won a victory today. But she was blissfully unaware of the storm that was coming. A storm that would challenge everything she believed about power and control. The Washingtons were done staying silent. And the quiet, complacent world Gertrude had lived in for so long was about to be turned upside down. The fallout from the article was far-reaching. As Camille read the piece in the local newspaper, she felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation. Their story was out there for everyone to see, their struggles. The harassment they had endured. And the quiet strength they had shown in the face of relentless prejudice. She knew this could lead to change. But she also knew it would come with risks. Not everyone in Silver Pines would be sympathetic. Across the street, Gertrude was livid. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from furious neighbors demanding answers. Berating her for her actions. Or cutting ties altogether. Her sense of control over the neighborhood was slipping. And she could feel her carefully maintained reputation crumbling. For years, she had been able to influence and intimidate those around her. To control the narrative of what Silver Pines was supposed to be. But now, her own actions had turned her into an outcast. Determined to regain her influence, Gertrude took matters into her own hands. That evening, she gathered a small group of neighbors, those who shared her views or who had been swayed by her stories about the Washingtons, disrupting the peace of Silver Pines. They met in her living room, the atmosphere tense and filled with resentment. She urged them to stand against what she described as an invasion, hoping to rally support to push the Washingtons out. But as she spoke, she could see hesitation in the faces of her neighbors. The Washingtons had become well liked by many in the community. And Marcus's calm, dignified presence as mayor had won over more people than Gertrude realized. Slowly, members of her circle began to pull away, realizing the depth of Gertrude's bitterness. One by one, they made excuses, leaving her alone with her anger and growing isolation. Meanwhile, the Washingtons received support from unexpected places. Families they hadn't known well stopped by to introduce themselves, bringing baked goods or flowers as gestures of solidarity. Camille and Marcus felt an outpouring of kindness from the community, an affirmation that they belonged in Silver Pines. For the first time, Camille felt a sense of hope, a belief that they weren't just surviving in this neighborhood, they were thriving. Building real connections. The final blow came a few weeks later, when the Silver Pines Neighborhood Association held a public meeting to address recent complaints about harassment and the use of police resources for false reports. Marcus, with Camille by his side, attended the meeting, sitting near the front as the association president addressed the room. Gertrude, seated near the back, watched in mounting dread as her actions were brought into the spotlight. The association had taken the Washingtons' complaints seriously and conducted an investigation. Now, they announced that any further instances of harassment or misuse of neighborhood resources would result in severe penalties, including fines and potential expulsion from the association. Marcus stood to speak, delivering a powerful message about community, acceptance, and the importance of standing against prejudice. His words resonated deeply, drawing applause from the attendees. Gertrude sat silently, her face pale, realizing that her influence had finally been broken. She had lost the power she once wielded so effortlessly. The Washingtons had not only earned their place in Silver Pines but had also exposed the prejudice lurking in its heart, forcing the community to confront its own values. As the meeting ended, Camille and Marcus left the room, surrounded by newfound friends and supporters. They walked home together, hand in hand, knowing that Silver Pines would never be the same. They had faced prejudice, hostility, and challenges they had never anticipated. But they had also found strength, resilience, and a community willing to stand by them. The Washingtons were here to stay, and Silver Pines was finally, truly, their home. The sun was just beginning to set on Silver Pines, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet streets as Camille and Marcus returned from the neighborhood association meeting. They felt a sense of triumph, a victory not just for themselves, but for the values they wanted to uphold in their community. But they also knew that this was far from the end. Gertrude's silence in the meeting had not gone unnoticed, and Camille sensed that the situation was reaching a boiling point. They had struck a blow to Gertrude's influence, but she was not one to let go easily. Back at their home, they sat together in the living room, reflecting on how far they had come. Just months ago, they had been newcomers, navigating hostility and subtle exclusion. Now, they were not only a part of the community but advocates for change, pushing Silver Pines toward a new understanding of acceptance. The next morning, Camille was preparing breakfast when she heard a loud knock on the door. She froze, her heart pounding as she exchanged a look with Marcus. "Expecting anyone?" he asked, his voice calm but alert. "No," Camille replied, moving toward the door with caution. When she opened it, there stood Gertrude, looking disheveled and furious, her eyes wild with anger. Camille's stomach tightened, but she held her ground. "You think you've won, don't you?" Gertrude hissed, her voice low and trembling. "You think you've humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood." Camille took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ms. Wallace, no one wanted this to happen. We wanted peace, but you left us no choice. We had to stand up for ourselves and for what's right." Gertrude scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "People like you don't belong here. Silver Pines was perfect until you showed up with your so-called progress and your ridiculous sense of entitlement." She took a step closer, her face contorted with a hatred that shocked Camille. Camille was about to respond when Marcus stepped forward, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Ms. Wallace," he said, his tone calm but filled with authority, "I suggest you leave. This conversation is over. Our family has endured enough of your hostility." In the weeks following the neighborhood association meeting, Camille and Marcus noticed subtle but powerful changes throughout Silver Pines. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now waved as they walked by, exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store, and even invited the Washingtons over for coffee or dinner. The supportive gestures were small but meaningful, like puzzle pieces coming together to create a fuller, more welcoming picture of community. Camille could finally breathe a little easier, feeling that they had not only been accepted but had helped change the neighborhood for the better. But for every kind gesture, there was a lingering shadow. Gertrude Wallace, now stripped of her influence and ostracized by many in Silver Pines, had become more reclusive than ever. Her once well-kept lawn began to look neglected, weeds sprouting along the edges, and her flowers wilted, as if mirroring the bitterness within her. Windows that had once been spotlessly clean were now covered in a thin layer of dust. She no longer appeared at neighborhood events or gatherings, and when neighbors did catch a glimpse of her, she moved with a hunched posture, avoiding eye contact, a far cry from the domineering presence she'd once been. One crisp Saturday morning, Camille and Marcus were enjoying coffee on their porch when they noticed a figure lurking at the edge of their property. At first, Camille thought it was a passerby. But as the figure lingered, she recognized the outline of Gertrude's small, wiry frame. "Do you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his eyes narrowing. "She's watching us again," as if sensing their gaze. Gertrude quickly turned and scurried away, disappearing down the sidewalk. Camille felt a chill, a nagging sense that something more was brewing. The past few weeks had been relatively calm, with only minor incidents, mysterious footprints in their garden, a broken mailbox, but nothing overt. Camille wondered if Gertrude was simply trying to intimidate them, hoping they'd second-guess their place in Silver Pines. But Marcus was resolute. "We're not giving her the satisfaction of seeing us rattled," he said firmly. "We've worked too hard to let her disrupt our lives again." Days passed without incident, and the Washingtons began to relax, believing that Gertrude might have finally retreated for good. But one night, just as they were settling in to watch a movie with their kids, there was a sudden, loud crash from the front yard. Camille and Marcus exchanged a worried look before rushing outside. There, in the glow of their porch light, they saw that their mailbox had been smashed to pieces. The remains lay scattered across their driveway, jagged edges sticking out like cruel symbols of the hostility they had fought so hard to overcome. Camille's heart raced as she scanned the street. But it was deserted, with no sign of Gertrude or anyone else. Marcus immediately called the police, determined to document each incident. When the officers arrived, they took notes and promised to increase patrols in the area. But without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The vandalism was the final straw for Marcus. The next day, he filed a formal complaint with the city council, demanding an investigation into the harassment his family had endured. He spoke publicly at a council meeting, sharing his family's experiences and calling for stronger protections against hate-fueled actions in Silver Pines. His speech was met with applause, and several council members expressed their support, promising to take immediate action. Word spread quickly, and within days, the Washington story was featured in the local newspaper. The article detailed the harassment they had faced, the changes Marcus had implemented as mayor, and the overwhelming support they had received from much of the community. Silver Pines was thrust into the spotlight, and residents began reflecting on the kind of neighborhood they wanted to be. The publicity only fueled Gertrude's resentment. She felt humiliated, her carefully constructed image as the neighborhood's moral guardian shattered. Desperation took hold, and her actions grew more erratic. She began leaving handwritten notes in her neighbors' mailboxes, filled with warnings about the Washingtons, corrupting Silver Pines and eroding its values. But her attempts to sway public opinion fell flat, with most neighbors dismissing her as paranoid and bigoted. One afternoon, Camille found one of Gertrude's notes slipped under her door. The message was scrawled in messy handwriting, filled with unhinged accusations and veiled threats. Camille felt a surge of anger and fear, but she knew confronting Gertrude would only escalate the situation. Instead, she handed the note to the police, adding it to the growing stack of evidence. Meanwhile, life in Silver Pines continued to change. Inspired by Marcus's efforts, residents began organizing community events that celebrated diversity and inclusivity. A local teacher arranged a cultural fair at the neighborhood park, showcasing foods, music, and crafts from various backgrounds. Camille volunteered to help, bringing dishes from her family's traditional recipes and sharing stories about her heritage. It was a joyful celebration, a symbol of the neighborhood's transformation, and a clear sign that Gertrude's old-fashioned ideals no longer held sway. But Gertrude was not one to let go of her grudge quietly. Late one night, as Camille and Marcus were preparing for bed, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through their garden. Camille's heart raced, and she quickly checked the security camera footage. To her shock, there was Gertrude, creeping around their yard, clutching something in her hand. Marcus dialed the police immediately, reporting the trespassing, and within minutes, they arrived, catching Gertrude in the act. She tried to protest, claiming she was just checking on the neighborhood. But the officers had heard enough. They issued her a formal warning, threatening charges if she continued her harassment. The sight of Gertrude being escorted off their property was both surreal and satisfying for Camille. She had never wanted to see anyone in such a situation, but the relief was undeniable. Finally, there was a clear consequence for Gertrude's actions, a line drawn in the sand. Following the incident, the neighborhood association held a special meeting to address the harassment. This time, it wasn't just Marcus who spoke up. Neighbor after neighbor took the floor, sharing their experiences and expressing their disgust with Gertrude's actions. Some even apologized to the Washingtons for not standing up sooner, acknowledging the harm that silence could cause. It was a cathartic moment for the community, a collective stand against prejudice and fear. Gertrude, who had been sitting at the back of the room, looked defeated, her gaze fixed on the floor as her former friends and neighbors condemned her behavior. She was no longer the respected authority she had once been, she was an outsider. Isolated by her own actions. When the association voted to formally censure her, effectively stripping her of any influence in neighborhood matters, Gertrude left the room in silence. Her once confident stride reduced to a slow, defeated shuffle. In the days that followed, Silver Pines continued to heal. The Washingtons became more involved in community projects, with Camille organizing a neighborhood cleanup day and Marcus establishing a scholarship fund for local students. They had not only earned their place but had helped redefine what Silver Pines stood for. As for Gertrude, she retreated further into her isolation, her house becoming an eerie reminder of a past the neighborhood was eager to leave behind. Rumors circulated that she was considering moving away, and though Camille felt a twinge of pity, she knew that Gertrude's departure would bring peace to Silver Pines. One warm spring morning, as Camille watered her garden, she noticed a "for sale" sign being placed in Gertrude's yard. She watched quietly, a sense of closure settling over her. Gertrude had fought bitterly to drive them out, to keep Silver Pines under her control. But in the end, it was Gertrude who was leaving, her influence dissolved by her own intolerance. The neighborhood felt different now, more open, more vibrant, and filled with a renewed sense of unity. The Washingtons' presence had not only challenged the status quo but had brought people together in a way that no one had expected. Camille felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that her family had helped build something lasting. On the day Gertrude's moving truck arrived, neighbors gathered outside to watch in silence, exchanging glances that spoke of relief and finality. Camille stood beside Marcus, their hands intertwined, as they watched the last remnants of Gertrude's presence leave Silver Pines. It was a bittersweet moment, a reminder of the hardship they had endured but also a testament to their resilience. That evening, the Washingtons hosted a small gathering, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate the new chapter in Silver Pines. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter, music, and the delicious aroma of Camille's cooking. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Camille looked around at the faces of her friends, the people who had come to stand by them. In that moment, she knew that they had not only found acceptance but had truly built a home in Silver Pines. They had faced adversity, prejudice, and fear, but they had emerged stronger, with a community that valued them and the change they had inspired. As the night wore on and the stars appeared in the sky, Camille and Marcus shared a quiet moment on the porch, reflecting on their journey. They had fought for their family, for their right to belong, and in doing so, they had changed Silver Pines forever. And as they watched their children laughing and playing with their friends, Camille knew that they had not only claimed their place but had helped create a future free from the shadows of the past, a future where love, acceptance, and unity would light the way for generations to come. But Gertrude wasn't listening. Her gaze remained fixed on Camille, a twisted smile appearing on her face. "You think you can change this neighborhood? Turn everyone against me? I've been here long before you. And I'll be here long after you're gone." Camille's anger flared, but she refused to let it show. "No, Ms. Wallace. This neighborhood is changing with or without you. It's not about us against you. It's about people wanting to live in peace and respect each other." Gertrude took a step back, her face flushed with rage. "You'll regret this," she muttered before turning on her heel and stalking away, her footsteps echoing down the driveway. As Camille watched her go, she felt a mix of anger and pity. Gertrude's world was collapsing around her, but she refused to see the damage her hatred was causing to herself, to the neighborhood, and to the values she claimed to protect. Marcus placed a comforting hand on Camille's shoulder. "Let her go," he said quietly. "People like her, they burn out on their own." But Camille couldn't shake the feeling that Gertrude was planning something more, something that could harm their family. That night, she double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before going to bed, her mind racing with worry. Marcus tried to reassure her, but she knew that Gertrude's hatred wouldn't fade so easily. Days passed, and the Washingtons continued to receive support from neighbors who appreciated the changes Marcus was advocating for as mayor. But amid the positivity, small, unsettling incidents began to occur. Camille found garbage strewn across their lawn in the mornings. Mysterious notes with hateful messages slipped under their door. And once, someone even spray-painted an ugly message on their mailbox. Marcus reported each incident to the police, But without clear evidence, there was little they could do. The harassment grew subtle but steady, casting a shadow over the family's newfound peace. Camille suspected Gertrude, but she had no proof. The police assured them that they were monitoring the situation closely. But the fear lingered, an ever-present reminder that some battles were fought in shadows. One evening, Marcus held a gathering at City Hall to discuss his new policies, focused on creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment in Silver Pines and the surrounding areas. The meeting drew a crowd, and to Camille's surprise, many of their neighbors attended, eager to hear Marcus's ideas and voice their support. The evening was filled with productive discussions and encouraging feedback, a testament to the progress they were making. As the meeting ended, Camille and Marcus were greeted by several members of the community who had previously been neutral or distant. People shook their hands, shared stories, and expressed their excitement about the changes coming to Silver Pines. Camille felt a surge of hope, believing that perhaps, slowly but surely, their efforts were creating real change. But as they walked back to their car that night, Camille's sense of unease returned. They were parked in a dark corner of the lot, and she noticed a shadowy figure watching them from across the street. She clutched Marcus's arm, her heart pounding as they reached the car. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Marcus glanced over, his expression serious. "Stay close, Cam, let's go." They quickly got into the car, and as they drove away, Camille looked in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the figure retreating into the darkness. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, that Gertrude's obsession had grown darker, more dangerous. The incidents continued, growing bolder. Their car tires were slashed one morning, forcing Marcus to call for a replacement. Camille found dead plants on her front porch, a sign that someone had been tampering with their property. And then, one night, they awoke to the sound of glass shattering. Marcus rushed downstairs to find their living room window broken, shards of glass scattered across the floor. Camille followed, her heart racing as she peered out into the dark street, searching for any sign of movement. "Call the police," Marcus said, his voice steady but tense. Camille quickly dialed, her hands shaking as she reported the incident. When the officers arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of the intruder. They took statements, documenting the incident as part of an ongoing pattern of harassment. Camille felt a sense of helplessness wash over her. It seemed that no matter how much support they received from the community, there was still a dark undercurrent working against them. In the days that followed, Camille and Marcus installed security cameras around their property, determined to protect their family. The footage captured images of people coming and going, but none of the incidents were caught on camera, as if the culprit knew exactly where the blind spots were. One evening, as they reviewed the footage, Marcus looked at Camille, his expression grim. "This has gone on long enough. I'm going to confront her." Camille hesitated, worry flickering in her eyes. "Are you sure, Marcus? What if it only makes things worse?" Marcus shook his head. "She needs to know we're not afraid of her. This is our home, too." The next morning, Marcus walked across the street to Gertrude's house, his footsteps purposeful. Camille watched from the window, her heart in her throat. She saw him knock on the door, his stance firm and unyielding. Moments later, Gertrude opened the door, her face twisted into a scowl. The conversation that followed was tense and filled with veiled threats. But Marcus stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. Camille couldn't hear their words, but she could see the determination in his eyes and the barely contained anger in Gertrude's. Finally, he turned and walked away, leaving Gertrude standing in the doorway, her face pale with rage. That night, as they sat together in their living room, Marcus took Camille's hand. "It's over, Cam. She knows we're not backing down. Whatever she tries next, we'll be ready." And they were, with the support of the community, the vigilance of their neighbors, and the security measures they had taken. The Washingtons continued to stand strong, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Over time, the harassment stopped, fading into a distant memory as Gertrude's influence dwindled, her bitterness consuming her from within. The Washingtons had endured a storm, but they had emerged stronger. A family bound by resilience and unwavering love. Silver Pines was no longer just a place they lived, it was their home. A testament to their courage and their commitment to building a future free from prejudice. And in the quiet of their home, with the shadows finally lifted, Camille and Marcus knew that they had not only claimed their place but had changed Silver Pines forever.